Hi everyone, Simon Chappell here. I'm the Quit Alcohol Coach, and today I'm joined by Clare Maskery, who's celebrating 100 days sober today. Clare, thank you for joining me.
Hello, hi.
How are you doing?
I'm okay, a little bit nervous.
You don't need to be nervous. That's absolutely fine.
Fine.
So you've done 100 days alcohol free. I'm sure everyone's going to be really interested to hear how you did that, what it was like when you were drinking, what worked for you, and why you're sharing your story. So perhaps we could start with what your actual drinking life looked like and what led you to a point where you decided you needed to make a change.
Okay, so drinking started in my teenage years. I think about 17 years old. Again, I didn't have very much confidence, so we'd go down to the pub and then I'd have a drink and then that would give me confidence. That escalated by my mid-20s. I was drinking quite heavily but thinking it was acceptable. I was young. I would wake up with hangovers and basically then I would end up drinking in the evening again, well, early afternoon if it was the weekend. This escalated when I was 30. I knew I had a problem. I'd had some accidents and made some silly mistakes. So at 30, I did give up for a year, but it was a different experience to the one I'm experiencing now. It was just hanging on by my fingertips. I got heavily into running. And then I did the age-old, you think that you can moderate your drinking. So I decided that I would start drinking, but I would only drink outside of home. So I basically ended up organising to go out a lot more so I could drink. And then obviously that then piled into my home life. Then there was 2 other occasions where I managed to give up for a couple of months where again I was hanging on by my fingertips, and the reason I gave up for those couple of months again is because I made some silly mistakes and had some accidents. And then the last 5 years basically were a living hell for me. I basically lived the cycle for 5 solid years of waking up at 3 a.m. in the morning, thinking I've got to sort my life out, waking up in the morning, then feeling not hungover, but very jaded, drive to work, admittedly probably over the limit, do my work. Sometimes I'd avoid people in the mornings because I felt so rough. And when driving to work, saying to myself, I must give up, I've got to sort my life out. By about midday, I would be thinking, I can't wait to go home for a drink. I would then get in. The first thing I would do is go straight to the fridge and pour a glass of wine before absolutely anything, because wine was the priority. And then I would then mix with the family, find out how their days were. Within a couple of hours, I probably would have drunk 1.5 to 2 bottles of wine. Misconception for a lot of people is when you drink this quantity of wine that you end up rolling around on the floor drunk, but basically you still function, you still cook dinner, you still put your child to bed, you still have a conversation, you still watch TV, even though you don't remember what you watched in the morning.
I remember that.
You text people as well and then go to work and they'd say about the text and you'd be like, and you'd have to wing it because you just don't remember. So towards the end, I'd actually, first thing in the morning, I would then check my WhatsApp, my messages, to see who I had text the night before, to remind myself of what we've been discussing and about what, I'd watched on the telly. So when I went to work, I was in the loop with my own conversation. So it got pretty desperate. I also then, I was experiencing blackouts for the last couple of years, and blackouts doesn't mean that you're passing out and falling asleep, which I initially thought that they meant. It actually means that you're just functioning, doing everything that you usually do, but you have no recollection in the morning. And an example would be I'd wash and straighten my hair, and I'd wake up in the morning and think, oh, I've washed and straightened my hair. Something, Simon, you wouldn't have done.
No, I don't. That's one thing I managed to avoid.
So, and then it escalated, not with the quantity so much. This was a midweek drinking. Weekends I would start a lot earlier. But it escalated to waking up and I'd have shaky hands. But the desperate thing is, I've been to the doctors numerous times over the 5 years, desperate for help. Doctors weren't able to help me. I was then diverted to the alcohol and drugs unit in Guildford. It transpires that they weren't really able to help me because I wasn't able to attend any of the meetings because I had a full-time job and they couldn't really accommodate, no disrespect to them, but they couldn't accommodate my needs because I was in a full-time job. So again, I'm like, well, what do I have to do? Do I actually now have to lose my job to seek help? Which wasn't going to happen for me at this moment, but who knows, way down the line, if I hadn't met Simon, that potentially could have been me.
Did they direct you to Alcoholics Anonymous? Is that the process?
Well, I've been to AA throughout when I was 30 and I gave up. AA wasn't for me. I've been in and out of AA for many years. But it wasn't for me. It was a very, no disrespect to AA again, it was a very, it wasn't a very happy place. Well, it wasn't a happy place for me. And I almost felt shameful. And what I want from my experience and from my video is to break down the stigma around alcohol addiction, because it's not a shameful thing and we should be able to ask for help. I suffered in silence for a very long time before I told anybody. You tell family that you've got this problem, but they don't believe you because you're not that person that's on a park bench with a brown paper bag. It took a long time for my family to understand. And I had their full support completely, and they're so proud of me. So I've been in and out of AA. Alcohol services couldn't really help. Towards the end, towards me finding success and beating alcohol addiction, I had a lovely lady who would take time, but it was during the lockdown period. So she would phone me when I wasn't working and we'd have chats. I was still drinking. She would phone me when I wasn't working. Sometimes I missed the phone calls on purpose because I was so embarrassed that I wasn't able to stop drinking. We'd have conversations about how the hell do people even get to day one, let alone succeed in day one. It was totally out of my reach. I just that was something I couldn't comprehend, how people could actually do this and get to day one, let alone go alcohol free for the rest of their lives. I would worry about things in advance, like how would I deal with Christmas, holidays, crazy things, because it wasn't even Christmas, it was March. So I would speak to her, and then towards the end, I think I confided in some people at work. Some people at work I'd known for many years, but I started to confide in some other people. I even told my boss, in the desperation and hope that she might breathalyze me in the mornings when I came in, to make me think, Christ, Claire, you've got to stop. If the doctor said I had liver enzymes that were elevated, would I stop? No. Was I going to stop if they were threatening to take my child into care at that time? I don't know that if I could stop. And that makes me so upset to think. I mean, that makes me so upset even to think about it now, that I was so selfish and so addicted that, I couldn't see a way forward. So to where I've been able to stop drinking was, I confided in my neighbour last year at some point. Weirdly, she spoke about Simon's course, or Simon's link with alcohol and addiction. At that time last year, I was like, oh wow, that's amazing. I then threw myself into Facebook groups. I never posted on the groups because I was so scared that my friends and family would see that I've been posting in these groups. So I would just sit on the sidelines. I would read these every night, drunk. I'd wake up in the morning and read these, as well as the text messages I'd sent the night before, just to see if I could get motivation to stop this awful cycle. Anyhow, moving on to this year, in the current situation, I was like, imagine if I could take something out of COVID-19, and imagine if I could come out the other end sober. But that was, again, something that was just a thought, and I never thought would be possible. Anyhow, it's at a social distance barbecue. We were all drinking, having a great time, and in the morning, I don't remember half of the evening, and apparently we'd gone into a garden. We'd had a whole evening in someone's garden, and the last thing I remember was eating my burger on the pavement, which was probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So that happens. Anyway, I carried on for another couple of days. I then had another huge drinking, not drinking spree, but I got really inebriated. Spoke to my neighbour over the fence, slurring. I could see that he was looking at me like I was a bit weird because it was just 6 o'clock in the evening. In the end, I reached out to my neighbour and said, please, could you... No, I didn't. I saw Simon's course pop up on one of the social media pages. I phoned the number that I was then outsourced to a lady in London and I phoned her, and she was so kind, and she said she could help me. But I had it really weirdly that I wanted it to be Simon. He lives in my road. I felt that it was fate, that it was meant to be.
It is fate.
So I reached out to my neighbour and I said, please, can you contact him? And then after I'd done that, I just felt mortified because, like, oh my God, he lives in my road. I've reached out, but how am I going to give up drinking? Because what if I get to, we speak to him and then I don't give up drinking and I have to walk past his house every single day? It's just like going to be mortifying. Anyway, Simon got in contact. We had our first Zoom call just to chat, to see if we were a match for each other and if he could help me. Again, you hear people say about his contagious enthusiasm. I felt so enthusiastic after the first Zoom call, which was just a chat, that maybe this is something that I can do. Maybe I can overcome this and regain a life. And then we started our chats weekly when I was between shifts at work. Still, I was drinking, and I was just like, how am I going to do this? I don't know how I'm going to do this. And then May the 18th, somehow, I don't believe in God, but by the grace of God, I did day one, and I was just like, I just couldn't believe it. And now I'm 100 days sober. Couldn't be happier. It's just I have now regained my life.
It's amazing. And I've seen that change in you as well. I saw you when you were drinking, and the difference is just remarkable. Yeah. So if that was on the outside, and
they say that you hear people say that they feel empty and that they're soulless, and I think people looking at you, your friends who don't know, don't see that. But when you look back at pictures of yourself, you think, Christ, I was just empty.
Yeah, and the change is just incredible, and 100 days is amazing. And I know from our conversations that there's no going back. You've
absolutely
really
never
got
no
this.
Going back. It's, as you said, and as I didn't believe it initially, you just educate yourself so much, and this is now a lifestyle change. I'm not prepared to go back to the living torture that was my life, ever.
And you were nervous about telling people at work, and you mentioned about the stigma. I imagine it was possibly around that, but the reaction you've had has been completely different.
Yep. Amazing. I'd always intended to tell my story. I said to the lady at work that I want to be, the one that I was hoping was going to breathalyze me, that I want to be a success story, and I want to be a success story so I can help at least one person overcome, addiction, so they do not have to go through what I have been through. Going back to the people at work, and intending to tell my story, 88 days, somebody said, oh, because I'm known for drinking, bet you're going home and you're going to have wine. And I thought, you know what, I'm working really, really hard. Not so hard. Well, it's not hard. It becomes a lifestyle change. There are times, obviously, where you think, how am I going to deal with the situation? Because I used to use wine to deal with that situation, but we'll come on to that later. So I just said, actually, no, I'm not going home for a drink tonight. I've been 88 days sober. And people just looked up and they were like, yeah, whatever. I said, no. And they're like, what, you're never going to drink again? And I said, no, I'm never going to drink again. And then people just stopped what they were doing. They gathered around where the station I was working at. And I kind of told my story. I didn't tell it as much detail as I've just kind of told you. But I told them about the desperate times and things, and people were so supportive. And one person in particular was, I never knew this was going on in your life. I just, I had no idea. I had people text me saying, thank you for sharing your story. I'm so proud of you. I had one person say that they respect me, which was lovely. I've had a card from another colleague saying how proud and impressed she is. People have been absolutely amazing. And my friends and my family, the friends know who they are 100%, that's been there for me. So I'm not going to give a speech.
Yeah, like an
I'd
award.
like to thank. So people at work have been so supportive. My neighbours, we all socialise together. They've been so supportive. So yeah, it's been a journey, and I sometimes wish I'd met you, a long time ago, but like you pointed out the other day, I probably wouldn't have wanted to meet the old you anyway.
No, I wouldn't have been much use back when I was drinking.
So, we go on this journey, and I've obviously been on this journey for some reason, and here we are, we've met, and here I am, amazingly happy with my life. So happy that I scream in my car sometimes. I'm so happy. It's brilliant. It's crazy. Yeah. So
one thing you mentioned, and I've seen it, as you said, we live on the same street, which is just bizarre. But your neighbours have a lot of barbecues and outdoor parties. I often see them when I drive into the street, and you touched on them. That must have been a challenge in the early days. And I know a lot of people mention it about socialising and going to barbecues, things like that. How did you deal with that?
Well, we've talked about it. That initially, I would shy away from the occasions. Obviously, there's not been loads of occasions because of the current situation, but we are a very social group. So initially, I shied away from it, and I'd stay indoors, because at the beginning of the journey, I didn't really want to be around anybody, and weirdly, I didn't even really want to be around my family. I will come back to the neighbours in a minute, but initially I'd just hide upstairs, not all the time, but if there was any aggro downstairs, if my little boy was kicking off or something was happening, I couldn't deal with the situations, because I would use wine to deal with those situations. So I would just take myself out of those situations and just be a bit alone for a while, initially. And then as time went on, my neighbours became aware. They became aware, I think, in June just because my husband wasn't aware who I told and who I hadn't. I'd only told one person, but now everybody knew. So I was just like, well, you're gonna have to embrace this. People were, again, so supportive. Oh, and then I started going out to the gatherings, and I go out with my new drinks, which I haven't mentioned, but they've been life-changing. They're so good that I actually feel that I crave. So I still have an addiction of some sort. I crave those of an evening, but they're not going to ruin my life. So I started going out with those, and then we moved to June. My husband mentioned to people. People then spoke to me about it, and were very, very supportive, but said, I will drink one day, won't I, again? And I was like, well, at that point I was like, no, I'd like to think no, I'm not gonna ever drink again. But I wasn't so confident, because this was June and obviously now we're August. So moving on, I've been to another few social occasions. The last one being a couple of weeks ago. Had a great time. I sat there with my drink. The conversation got on to seed lip and actually how much that cost, and that caused more of a reaction than me not even drinking. I did have a couple of people come up to me and try and offer me wine, and I said no. And then one of my neighbours stepped in and said, no, stop offering her wine. She doesn't need it. She doesn't want it. And I felt very grateful for that. So now everybody's on board. People are fascinated by how I'm doing it and by, why I'm doing it. So, I've got a lot to talk about because people are asking questions, and, something I feel very passionate about now. So my neighbours have been very, very, very supportive as well.
You mentioned about dealing with challenging situations without wine. So, for example, if your son's upset about something, or there's something causing you emotional discomfort, I did the same thing previously. I would have just drunk to blot it out. Talk to me about that. Like, what was the experience? How's it been since you dealing with those things without alcohol?
Oh my gosh. Initially, because obviously we're in lockdown and you're trying to be a teacher. And initially being a teacher, well, I'm not a very good teacher. So I would be able to have wine at 4 o'clock. And then I became a great teacher. Situations, I've spoken to my son about this, and he's so proud of me. We'll walk down the alcohol aisle in Tesco's and he'll say, but Mummy, you don't drink alcohol anymore. So people around me know that I don't drink alcohol. Do you know what I think? No, I don't. And actually I'm really, really proud. So I don't mind that he talks about it. So he's been great. But when there's been situations where I would have turned to wine, weirdly, you've mentioned meditation. I've never done that in my life. And on one occasion, I just took myself off and I put my Calm app on. And even though I could still hear him in the background having whatever tantrum he was having, I focused on the Calm app. And weirdly, it brought me down a peg or two. I went for a run. I use running quite a lot to get my stresses out. But ultimately, not drinking weirdly makes you be able to deal with these situations in a much calmer fashion. He smashed the iPad, and prior to that, I would be screaming, about the iPad. I was calm. There was no shouting, no crying. It was an accident at the end of the day. I was able to see that. So I don't think that we've actually had many occasions of late where I felt that I would have needed to go and have wine, because I'm able to deal with things calmly.
It's so true as well, because William Porter was talking about it recently, how something that might have in the past felt like a 7 or 8 out of 10 stress kind of becomes a 3 or 4.
Totally, yeah.
It's so true, and it's
incredible.
Deal with it,
and you talk about it, and it doesn't need to become this big thing, because you've reached it on, on the lower
And
scale of stress.
I think it's amazing that how old's your son? He's 7.
7.
Yeah. So I think it's amazing that you've talked to him and been really open, and that he's sort of he's like your number one fan, which
Yeah,
I think that's brilliant.
yeah, he is.
Because a lot of people are really afraid of talking to their kids and they don't open up about it. And obviously your experience is opening up was a great thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's so proud that he was outside your house with his friend in the summer. Well, it still is summer, kind of. And he was telling his friend, because I went down to get him because he was too far down the road, and he was like, "That's where Mummy's alcohol coach lives."
Oh my
So he's
God.
so proud.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
And I suppose in another way, it's another form of accountability, because it also just puts a bit of pressure on that, well, if I drink again, I'm going to be letting him down as well as myself.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I do not want him to let him down. Many, many years ago, one of my cries for help, after he was born, I was like, I just don't want to grow up to be a mum with a wine glass constantly in her hand. And that led me to give up not just give up, there was a lot to do with it, but I already knew then that that's not what I wanted for him. I'm so passionate. I just don't want my son to grow up to be like me. I don't want him to have to go through the pain and the torture that alcohol brings you. So I'm 7 years late to the party in that respect, but I'm teaching him now, and hopefully, he'll remember this when he's older.
He definitely will. I mean, my son was, I think, 12 when I quit, and I just feel like I've set him up for success in terms of making decisions about alcohol. I'm sure they'll probably both explore it at some point, but they'll know a lot more than they would have known.
Yeah.
And we're not glamorizing it to them any longer either.
The glamour actually is in quitting. The glamour is totally in the quitting. He sees how happy I am now. That's better than miserable.
And he's got your attention. You're 100% engaged there with him, interested, not preoccupied with thinking about drinking.
Yeah, because preoccupied. We've spoken about this in the past, where it becomes number one in your day-to-day life. And again, it's so shameful to say this, but I will say it. He was in hospital when he was a baby. Well, he was probably about 1.5, had a really bad chest infection, and the doctor said that I needed to stay the night with him. The first thought that came to my mind was, oh my God, I can't go home and have wine.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
There's my son who needs to stay in hospital, and I am prioritising wine over my child. I mean, that just is wrong on so many levels, but that's what addiction does to you.
It does. You put it in front of everything.
So that is just never, it's not an option to ever happen again.
Yeah, and that's like a non-negotiable from your point of view, is alcohol never ever comes before my son again. That was one of my non-negotiables.
Yeah, never.
And that means not drinking ever again.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And obviously, so it's 100 days today. Mm-hmm. What are the biggest sort of 2 or 3 changes that you've noticed over that time? You mentioned being calmer and feeling happier. What else has gone on?
I'm in control of my life. I no longer lay awake at night stressing about how the hell am I going to beat this addiction. Unfortunately, I lie awake at night now thinking, how the hell am I going to change the world? But that's positive. And again, I'm able to spin positives on all the negatives that happen in my life. I'm so changed. It's just, I can take a situation and put a positive. I've hurt my foot. I twisted my ankle a couple of weeks ago. That was the end of the world. But then I thought, well, actually, it's not the end of the world. Let's make this positive. Let's put the time and effort into something else. So I'm able to spin. I'm so much more positive. I'm totally happy. I'm 100% happy. I love life.
Who would have thought to hear you say that, after, from seeing you 101 days ago, or, just
Yeah,
over that period. It's just incredible. And I think with that injury you got with your ankle, you mentioned running is really important to you. And
yeah,
when you picked up that injury, I thought you were going to, be really down about it. And then to hear you with this positive frame, thinking, well, these things happen, it's okay. And,
yeah,
and then the next thing you were telling me how you'd made friends with the physio, and it was a bit of a gift, which is just
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah. It's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, what life throws at us. But yeah, it all happens for a reason, I guess.
Yeah, it's amazing. I suppose just the last thing, or last couple of things to touch on, is you mentioned that you had a period of a year where you were kind of hanging on, gritting your teeth, using willpower.
Yeah.
What was the biggest difference? I'm sure people will want to know the biggest difference between then and now, that
It
what like has
engulfed
helped.
me. Every single day engulfed me. I still was thinking about wine all the time, all the time. It just, my head's free. There's obviously occasions where, not very many occasions actually anymore, but there's obviously occasions that will crop up and you think about drinking. Um, but that year in itself was torturous, because even though I wasn't drinking, I still wanted to be drinking. So I was just hanging on. I wasn't happy ultimately. Wasn't happy at all.
So yeah, so I guess it's mindset, isn't it? Your mindset
Totally.
was you must have still believed that alcohol had some benefits, but
Yeah.
you weren't allowed to have it.
Yeah, totally, 100%. And now I know alcohol has no benefits at all whatsoever. And I, I don't want to belittle what I've gone through because it's been horrific, but it does get easier, and people won't believe that because, as I said previously, how do people even get to day one?
Yeah,
It's incomprehensible to me, but it's happened, and it does get easier.
I remember like day one myself. I can't even remember how many day ones I had, and I would do one day, and I was so proud of myself for just having one day off of drinking, and then the next day, every time I'd go back to drinking
Well,
over and over.
you could
And
pretty much turn any emotion into wanting a drink. You can be happy, I'm going to have a drink. You can be sad, I'm
yeah,
going to have a drink. Work's rubbish, I'm going to have a drink. It's sunny outside, I'm going to have a drink. It's raining, I'm going to have a drink.
yeah, anything,
No,
exactly.
there's nothing, that didn't deserve a drink, but that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, and you're just appreciating what the benefits of an alcohol-free life are, and roll on 1 year, 2 years, 3 years sober. And I suppose the final thing just to touch on was around the stigma. So as you go forward, you're keen to kind of get that message out there that
Absolutely.
there is no shame.
There is no shame. It's people need to be able to talk about it. I don't want to be on a soapbox and be going on about it all the time. But I'm just desperate for people to know that they can talk about it. There's nothing to be shameful about. It's an addiction at the end of the day. It's out of your control. Um, Please talk about it to somebody.
Yeah, I absolutely echo what you said there, totally.
Mm.
So we better watch out then. You'll probably be releasing a book, starting a YouTube channel, and becoming an international speaker before we know it.
Well, I'm called the goat at work, so I might release the goat got sober.
The
So
goat got sober.
and
Right, I'm
so
going to
could
remember
you.
that. Well, congratulations on 100 days, and thanks for coming on. I think your story's really inspirational and touching. I'm really proud of you for sharing it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Claire.